the next few minutes, I am going to show you something that will permanently change how you play after a loss. Not a mindset shift. Not a breathing tip. The actual biology of what your brain does in the seconds after you lose, and why it is costing you money in every session you have ever played. You lose a hand. Not a small one. A significant one. The pot you had been building toward. The stack that took 3 hours to build. An ace on the river that had no business being there. And something happens. Not just frustration. Something biological. Something chemical. Something that is going to affect every single decision you make for the next 30 to 40 minutes, whether you know it or not, whether you want it to or not. This video is about that something. What happens to your brain in the seconds after you lose is one of the most documented, most studied, and least applied pieces of neuroscience in the entire history of poker education. Players review hand histories. Players study solvers. Players hire coaches. And then they sit down in the next session and do it all again. Because the mechanism that produces the bad decision was never addressed. It was never even named. By the end of this video, you are going to understand your own brain in a way that most serious players never do. Not as inspiration, not as a motivational frame for thinking differently about losses, as precision, as a biological map of exactly what is happening inside your skull, neurologically, chemically, measurably, when the pot goes the wrong way, and exactly what you can do about it in the next 5 seconds. This knowledge is going to change how you see every session you have ever played, every downswing you blamed on variance, every period where you felt you could not do anything right, every decision you made in the 30 minutes after a pot you should not have lost, and every session you will ever play after tonight. This is not soft. This is not motivational. This is neuroscience applied to poker with the precision it deserves. No metaphors. No soft language. The actual biology of what happens when you lose, and the actual protocols that interrupt it. Stay until the end. The final section is the most practical thing this channel has produced. Not a concept. A system. 3 protocols that take less than 60 seconds total and permanently change the quality of every decision you make after a loss. Because right now, in every session you play, in every session you have played for years, you are losing money you do not know you are losing. Not to bad luck, not to better players, not to variance, to a chemical you produce inside your own body, triggered by a biological response that was designed for a completely different environment, corrupting decisions that your study has already prepared correctly. And by the end of this video, you will know its name, its mechanism, its precise timeline, and the exact interventions that stop it. In the millisecond after a significant loss, before you have consciously processed what happened, your brain has already activated a cascade. This is not metaphor. This is documented neural architecture. The signal travels 2 paths simultaneously. This is not theoretical. This is the documented neural routing that brain imaging studies have mapped with precision. The slow path goes through the thalamus to the neocortex, the thinking brain, where it gets analyzed rationally, placed in context, evaluated for meaning, and integrated with your existing understanding of the game. This path takes between 2 and 5 seconds to complete. The fast path goes directly from the thalamus to the amygdala. This path takes milliseconds, before the neocortex has even begun its analysis. The amygdala is your biological alarm system. It was designed for a world where hesitation meant death. It does not evaluate the event. It does not place the loss in the context of a long-term session or a profitable strategy. It processes one thing only: threat. And a significant loss, your stack shrinking, your invested chips gone, your read being wrong in front of other people, registers in the amygdala as threat. Not metaphorical threat, biological threat. The amygdala fires. And what happens next is a cascade that has been studied in brain imaging labs, measured in cortisol assays, and documented in decision quality research, and almost never discussed in poker education. First, adrenaline, released within seconds of the amygdala firing. Heart rate increases, breathing shallows, tension narrows to the immediate environment. The body prepares for immediate action, fight or flight, expressed in the poker context as the urge to act immediately, to reload fast, to call the very next hand with urgency. to demonstrate through action that you are still dangerous, still capable, still in control. That urgency is adrenaline, not confidence, not instinct, not the focused aggression of a player who has identified an exploitable situation. Biology. A survival hormone executing a program written for an environment where hesitation after threat detection had a cost measured in survival probability. This is where it gets dangerous. Second, cortisol, released 20 to 40 minutes after the stressor onset. This is the slow damage. Cortisol specifically suppresses the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for deliberate analysis, long-term thinking, impulse control, and the precise range calculations you spent months building in your study sessions. The cortisol peak hits 20 to 40 minutes after the loss. Think about that timing very carefully. You lost a big pot. You told yourself to move on. You have been playing for 20 minutes. You feel fine. You feel focused. You are now in the most dangerous window of your entire session, and it has not even fully opened yet. Here is what cortisol does to your decision-making with precision, not vaguely, not approximately, with the specificity that comes from controlled laboratory studies and brain imaging research. Research published in Communication Psychology, using the Trier social stress test to induce cortisol elevation in controlled conditions, documented that cortisol elevation leads to lower decision quality and higher incidence of experienced time pressure. The sensation that you need to act faster than the situation actually requires. Under cortisol influence, players are not making slower, more careful decisions. They are making faster ones, and they are experiencing those faster decisions as clarity, as the natural urgency of someone who reads situations quickly and acts decisively. This is the part nobody talks about. This is the disguise. This is what makes it so expensive. The cortisol-impaired decision does not feel impaired. It feels sharp. It feels like you know what is happening. It feels like the particular confidence of someone who has played enough to develop genuine instincts. It is not instincts. It is a stress hormone suppressing the exact cognitive functions that produce good instincts. There is more. A systematic review published in the European Journal of Neuroscience documented that chronic stress and cortisol elevation are associated with high immediate gains over larger future losses, meaning players under cortisol become more focused on recovering now than on playing correctly over time. The long game thinking disappears. The session-level strategy evaporates. The mind shrinks to the next hand. What can I do right now to get back what I lost? That shrinking is cortisol. And this is the expensive part. There is one more mechanism, and this one makes everything else worse. Norepinephrine, released alongside cortisol, specifically amplifies loss aversion. The Kahneman and Tversky research documented that losses are processed with roughly twice the psychological intensity of equivalent gains. But this ratio is not fixed. Under norepinephrine elevation, the ratio increases. The pain of losing becomes even more disproportionate to the potential pleasure of winning. This means that after a significant loss, your brain is not only impaired, it is running a system that makes losses feel catastrophically larger than they are, and gains feel comparatively smaller. This is the full chemistry of tilt. Not weakness, not a lack of discipline, not a character flaw that separates players who can handle pressure from players who cannot. A documented neurological cascade triggered by an event your brain was never designed to process without distortion. And it is happening to you right now, in every session where a significant loss occurs, whether you recognize it or not, whether you feel it or not. The cascade does not announce itself. It does not send a signal that says, your prefrontal cortex is now operating at reduced capacity. It produces a feeling that is indistinguishable from clarity and urgency and focused determination. Now let us talk about what this actually costs you, not in abstract terms, not in the language of general awareness. In session mathematics, the specific financial consequence of a biological cascade that most players have never measured because they did not know it existed. A significant loss occurs at the 60-minute mark of your session. The adrenaline fires immediately. The cortisol begins building. By the 90-minute mark, 30 minutes after the loss, the cortisol is at peak elevation. Your prefrontal cortex is operating at significantly reduced capacity. Your decision speed has increased. Your time horizon has shrunk. Your loss aversion has amplified. You are playing the most complex decision game in the world with a cognitively compromised brain for 20 to 40 minutes, longer if a second loss resets the clock. A sequence of losses can keep cortisol elevated for the entire remainder of a session. The window is cumulative, and most players have no idea how large it has grown by the time they leave the table. This is where most players lose money. Not in the hand where the cards went wrong, but in the 30 minutes that follow it. Here is the number that matters. Research on decision-making under stress documents that cortisol elevation produces measurably lower decision quality, not dramatically lower, but consistently lower across complex decisions. In poker, where the difference between a correct fold and a call is often subtle, even a measurable decrease in analytical precision has compounding financial consequences. Over a sample of sessions, the decisions made in the post-loss cortisol window account for a disproportionate percentage of total losses, not because the cards went wrong, because the brain was running a compromised operating system while the cards were being dealt. You are not losing money to the hands where the cards went wrong. You are losing money to the 30 minutes after. Not to bad luck, not to better players. To a biological window you never knew existed, running silently in the background of every session you have ever played. This distinction changes everything. It changes where the review should focus. It changes where the work should go. It changes the entire frame of what a session loss actually is and what produced it. The bad beat is the trigger. The 30 minutes that follow are the cost. Stop thinking about bad beats as isolated events. Start thinking about them as the beginning of a cognitive impairment window. A measurable period of reduced prefrontal function that affects every decision made within it. The bad beat costs you one pot. The cortisol cascade costs you the next 6 decisions, each made by a brain operating below the capacity you developed in every study session you have ever done. The bad beat is not the problem. The cascade is. And the cascade has been running unchecked in every session where you lost something significant and told yourself you were fine. Here is where most players make the most expensive mistake of their poker lives. Not the bad call on the river, not the missed value bet, not the strategic leak that their coach keeps flagging. They try to think their way out of tilt. And every time they fail, which is every time, they blame their own discipline. After a bad beat, they take a breath. They remind themselves that it was the right play. They review the hand mentally, confirm that their decision was correct, and tell themselves to move on. They apply all the rational analysis their study has given them, and then they play the next hand. The problem is not the thought. The problem is the biology. Cortisol is not a thought. It is a hormone circulating in your bloodstream. You cannot think yourself out of a hormonal state. Rational analysis does not reduce cortisol elevation. Reminding yourself that the call was correct does not restore prefrontal function. Telling yourself to focus does not interrupt a cascade that was triggered 20 minutes ago at the neurological level and is currently at peak concentration. This is why just stay calm has never worked under real pressure. Calm is a cognitive state. Cortisol elevation is a biological state. Different systems, different interventions. The intervention that works is physiological, not psychological. Here is what actually works. Extended exhale breathing, specifically breathing where the exhale is twice as long as the inhale, directly activates the parasympathetic nervous system through vagal nerve stimulation. The parasympathetic is the direct biological counterweight to the sympathetic stress response. When you exhale for 8 counts after inhaling for 4, you are not doing a breathing exercise. You are pharmacologically intervening in your own stress response at the neurological level. You are triggering measurable reduction in cortisol elevation via a pathway that bypasses the prefrontal cortex entirely, which is critical because the prefrontal cortex is precisely the system that the cortisol has already compromised. This is not yoga. This is documented neuroscience with direct application to the specific biological state that losses produce. 5 seconds. 1 breath cycle. A demonstrable, measurable effect on the cortisol cascade via direct parasympathetic activation. This is not calming yourself down. This is pharmacologically intervening in your own stress response using the only tool available that bypasses the prefrontal cortex entirely, because the prefrontal cortex is the system that is currently compromised. The players who manage tilt most effectively are not the players with the strongest discipline or the most mental toughness. They are the players who have learned to intervene at the biological level, where the cascade actually originates, rather than at the cognitive level, where it has already expressed. Now I want to give you the full picture of what is available to you, because this is where the video becomes a system and not just an explanation. You have been playing with incomplete information about your own brain, not about your opponents, about yourself. The hand histories you review are incomplete because they do not account for your neurological state when each decision was made. The coaching you receive is incomplete because it addresses the content of your decisions without addressing the biological context in which they are made. This is the gap. It is not a small gap. The mind of a grinder. Complete Collection was built specifically for this gap. Not to teach you what to know. You know enough. To give you the operational system that makes what you know available under the precise conditions your brain creates after a loss, during a downswing, in the hours of a session when the cortisol has had time to accumulate. 10 ebooks. One integrated system. Every protocol in this video expanded into a complete session-by-session framework. The pre-session calibration routine that sets your baseline before the first hand. The in-session reset protocol that interrupts the cortisol cascade in real time. The post-session review process that identifies your personal triggers. The specific event sequences that reliably push you into the impairment window and builds targeted interventions for each one. This is the difference between knowing how tilt works, which almost every serious player does at some level, and having a system that actually prevents the cascade before it corrupts the decisions that your study has spent months preparing. Here is what that difference costs you without the system. Every session where a significant loss occurs, and significant losses occur in most sessions, you are playing the subsequent 30 to 40 minutes at reduced cognitive capacity. If you play 3 sessions a week, you are playing roughly 90 minutes per week at a level below the capability you developed in study. Over a year, that compounds into hundreds of hours of impaired play that your session review cannot account for because it does not know where the impairment started. The collection is $29.90, available right now. 2 ways to get it immediately. Link in the pinned comment. Or go directly to wap.com. Pay with Apple Pay in seconds. No forms, no waiting, immediate access. The system is yours the moment you decide you want it. Collection 2 is launching now. Every Collection 1 buyer is receiving Book 1 of Collection 2 free, directly to their inbox, already being sent. Because this is a system, not a product, and the players inside it receive everything the system produces. The next session is coming tonight or tomorrow or this weekend. The cortisol cascade will fire the moment the first significant loss occurs, as it always has. The question is what system you have built to meet it. Let me show you the 3 protocols, not concepts. Executable systems. Protocol 1. The immediate reset. This runs in the 5 seconds between the end of a significant hand and the beginning of the next. Not during the hand review. Not while you are thinking about whether you played it correctly. In that 5-second gap, before the next hand begins, while the emotional charge is still fresh. Inhale 4 counts through the nose. Exhale 8 counts through the mouth. 1 cycle only. This is sufficient to begin vagal nerve activation and initiate the physiological counter-response to the adrenaline spike. Then 1 sentence spoken silently. That hand is complete. The information is filed. The next hand begins clean. This is not an affirmation. This is not positive thinking. This is a deliberate cognitive reorientation that prevents the amygdala from actively pattern matching the current situation against the one that just produced a threat response. Without this sentence, the amygdala continues searching for similarity between what just happened and what is happening now, a process that compounds the emotional charge across hands. The sentence interrupts that process. 5 seconds total. Immediate biological and cognitive intervention that you can run at any table, in any session, starting tonight. This next one catches what most players miss. Protocol 2. The 30-minute check. Set a silent timer for 30 minutes after any significant loss. When it fires, run 1 question only. Am I making decisions at the same speed I was in the first hour of this session? If the answer is faster, you are in the cortisol window. You are experiencing elevated time pressure and reduced deliberation depth without being aware of it. The intervention is Protocol 1 extended, 3 breath cycles instead of 1, followed by 2 minutes of deliberate attention to the table without acting on any marginal spots. If the answer is the same speed, your baseline has held. Continue playing normally. One question, 30 seconds maximum to answer honestly. A diagnostic that catches the most expensive phase of cortisol elevation before it has fully expressed in your hand history. This check has a side effect. The act of asking the question, by itself, begins to interrupt the cascade. Because metacognition about your current cognitive state is processed in the prefrontal cortex. Activating the prefrontal cortex to ask the question partially restores the prefrontal function you are trying to protect. Protocol 3. The session baseline map. After your next 5 sessions, track one data point only. At what minute did the first significant loss occur? And did your decision speed change in the 30 minutes that followed? 5 sessions of this data will give you your personal cortisol response profile, how quickly you enter the impairment window, how long it lasts, and what session contexts make it worse. This is the most valuable poker data you can collect, not hand histories, your own neurology. Here is what I want you to understand about tilt that almost no one in poker education will tell you directly. Not because they do not know it, but because it requires saying something that challenges a deeply held belief about what separates good players from bad ones. Tilt is not a character flaw. It is not evidence that you are not cut out for high-stakes decision-making. It is not a sign of weakness or a lack of discipline or an insufficient commitment to the mental game. It is a biological response to a specific type of stimulus, significant loss, that was designed for an environment where rapid, aggressive response to threat was adaptive. Your brain processes a lost pot the same way it processes a physical threat to your survival. Not because you are irrational, because you have a human brain. Because 200,000 years of evolution optimized your threat response system for environments where the cost of hesitation after a threat was death. The amygdala does not know the difference between a predator and a bad beat. It fires the same cascade for both. Understanding this changes 2 things fundamentally. First, it eliminates the self-judgment. The player who tilts after a bad beat is not a weaker player than the player who does not. The player who tilts is a player who has not yet built the system that interrupts the cascade at the biological level. That system is learnable. It is buildable. It does not require a personality change or a discipline transformation. It requires protocol. That protocol is what separates consistent winning players from players who win when they run well and spiral when they run badly. Second, it redirects the work. The work is not to study harder. The work is not to become more disciplined. The work is to build biological interventions that intercept the cascade at the neurological level before it reaches the prefrontal cortex and degrades the decision quality that your study has built. This is the most leveraged work in poker. More leveraged than any range study, more leveraged than any coaching session on specific spots, because it does not fix one decision. It fixes the biological context of every decision you make after a loss, which is to say, it fixes the most expensive category of decision in your entire game. And here is the proof that this is not theory. Chip Reese, one of the greatest cash game players ever to sit at a table, was once asked what separated him from the other elite players. His answer was not ranges, not reads, not strategy, not a superior understanding of the game. He said, "When they play their A game, I am really no better than they are. The difference is that they also have a C game and a D game. They become weak players when they steam. My edge is that I do not steam. That edge is not personality. It is not talent. It is not something Chip Reese was born with. It is architecture. A system built to intercept the cascade before it degrades the decisions that his knowledge had already prepared." Now let me give you the honest picture of what this looks like over time. Not the inspiring version, the mathematical version. 2 players, same stakes, same knowledge, same study hours, same coach, same solver library, same understanding of GTO fundamentals and exploitative adjustments. Player 1 has no loss response protocol. After every significant loss, they enter the cortisol window without intervention. Adrenaline spike. 40 minutes of elevated cortisol. Decision speed increases while they experience it as sharper focus. Long game thinking shrinks while they experience it as decisive play. Loss aversion amplifies while they experience it as appropriate caution. In a 3-hour session with a significant loss at the 60-minute mark, 120 minutes of potentially compromised play, measurably compromised across the sample. In a 3-session week, this plays out multiple times. The cumulative impaired volume shows up as variance, but it is not variance. Player 2 runs the 5-second reset after every significant hand. The adrenaline spike is intercepted before it compounds. The cortisol window is shortened because the parasympathetic activation begins before the cascade reaches full elevation. The 30-minute check catches any residual drift before it expresses indecisions. The session baseline map has already identified the specific event sequences that trigger the deepest impairment and has built targeted interventions for each one. Same knowledge, same skill ceiling, different floor. Over a year of sessions, the difference in post-loss decision quality between these two players accumulates into a financial gap. Not a dramatic one visible in any individual session. A consistent one, compounding across hundreds of sessions, that appears in the results as one player running well and one player running badly. But it is not running well and running badly, it is architecture. The ceiling of your poker game is determined by what you know, the ranges you have studied, the concepts you have internalized, the theory you have built over years of serious work. The floor is determined by what happens to your brain when things go wrong, by the cortisol window, by the cascade, by the 30 minutes after the significant loss where the biology has taken over and the strategy is running at reduced capacity. You have been spending almost all of your study time on the ceiling. The floor is where the money lives, not in the best hands, not in the sessions where everything aligns and the reads land clean and the cards cooperate. In the decisions made inside the cortisol window by a brain operating below its own capability. Decisions that your study already prepared correctly, but your biology prevented from executing. That gap has a dollar value. You have been paying it in every session you have ever played, and until today, you had no name for it. And the session that broke the most serious poker players, the ones who studied hard, put in the work, built real strategic knowledge, was not the one with the worst cards. It was the one after that session, and the one after that, and the one that followed 3 days later when the cortisol of the previous two had not fully cleared, and the baseline they sat down with was already compromised before the first blind was posted. The cascade is not just within a session, it compounds across sessions. Cortisol elevation from a brutal session does not fully clear before you sleep. If you sit down the next day without addressing the residual neurological state from the session before, you are starting that session with a compromised baseline. The cortisol window is already partially open before the first hand is dealt. This is why downswings feel like they take on a life of their own, like something external is happening to you rather than something internal. Why players who have been winning for months suddenly describe feeling like they cannot do anything right. Why the reads that were landing last week with precision suddenly feel unreliable and uncertain. Why decisions that would have been automatic 3 weeks ago now come with hesitation and second guessing. It is not a slump. It is accumulated biology. The solution is not to play through it. The solution is to build recovery architecture between sessions, not just within them. Sleep quality, the single most powerful cortisol recovery mechanism available. Physical movement, documented to reduce cortisol elevation through endorphin and dopamine restoration. Separation between sessions, not logging in to check results, not reviewing hands immediately after a loss, not carrying the emotional weight of one session into the preparation for the next. These are not wellness suggestions. They are not self-care practices. They are strategic interventions in the biological system that determines the quality of every decision you will make tomorrow. The same system that Fedor Holtz has publicly described building around his own preparation, that Elliot Rowe has documented across hundreds of high-stakes coaching relationships as the most leveraged work available to serious players. The best poker players in the world are not the ones who never tilt. They are the ones who have built recovery architecture around their biology. Before sessions, between sessions, after sessions, as an integrated system that treats the brain not as a secondary concern to be managed after the strategic work is done, but as the primary asset, the tool that everything else depends on. Your brain is the table. The money is a reflection of what happens inside it, not just what cards you are dealt and what decisions you make in ideal conditions, but what decisions you make in the conditions that most sessions actually create. The pressure, the losses, the cortisol windows. The accumulated biology of a session that has been testing you for 3 hours, and now you know exactly what happens inside it when you lose. Art, here is what changes when you implement this system. Not after one session. Over time, over 30, 50, 100 sessions, everything changes. Losses stop cascading. A significant pot going wrong is no longer the beginning of a 40-minute impairment window. It is a data point that gets filed. The reset runs. The next hand begins clean. The cortisol spike is intercepted before it can suppress the prefrontal analysis that your study prepared for exactly the situation you are now in. Downswing stop compounding, because the recovery architecture between sessions is in place. Because you are not starting each session carrying the accumulated cortisol residue of the last 3. Because the biological baseline is genuinely reset before the first hand, not assumed to be reset because enough time has passed. Session review becomes more accurate, because now you know where the impairment window was. You can look at your hand histories differently, not just asking whether the decision was correct, but asking whether the decision was made inside the cortisol window. The hands that look like strategic mistakes are often not strategic mistakes. They are biology, and biology has a different fix than strategy. Most importantly, the gap between who you are in your best sessions and who you are on average closes. Not because your ceiling raised, because your floor did. Jared Tendler calls this the inchworm. The ceiling advances when you add knowledge, but the average only changes when the floor moves. You have been spending years moving the ceiling. This is the work that moves the floor. Start tonight. After your next significant loss, before the next hand begins. Run the 5-second reset. Count it if you need to. Inhale 4. Exhale 8. 1 sentence. That hand is complete. The information is filed. The next hand begins clean. That is the beginning of the system. The full system, the complete protocols, the session baseline mapping process, the between-session recovery architecture, and the 14 other mental game frameworks that address every major category of cognitive impairment that serious poker players face, is in the Mind of a Grinder complete collection. 10 ebooks, 1 system, $29.90. 2 ways to access it right now, instantly. Link in the pinned comment. Or go to wap.com. Pay with Apple Pay in seconds. No waiting. No forms. Immediate access the moment you decide. Collection 2 is launching now. Every Collection 1 buyer receives Book 1 free, already being sent. Because the players inside this system receive everything it produces. Subscribe if you want to keep building this architecture. Share this with one player who is studying seriously and cannot understand why the results do not match the preparation. The cortisol cascade in this video is almost certainly part of the answer. From this moment on, every session you play will either be controlled or controlled by your biology. And now you know which one it has been. Your brain is the table. Now build the floor.